For more than 2 centuries, the Stars and Stripes has flown over the land of the free and the home of the brave. We know that it's flying around the world today, everywhere U.S. forces are stationed, protecting all of us. There are none still alive who saw it flying above the American doughboys in places like Bella Wood, Cantigny, and the Meuse Argonne. Now it's our job to keep faith with those brave men and women who came before us. In less than 2 years, some 4.7 million Americans would join the armed forces during World War I, many of them volunteers. In just 6 months of decisive combat, more would die than in a decade of war in Korea and Vietnam combined, with a higher casualty rate than World War II. 116,516 doughboys made the ultimate sacrifice under the American flag. Today, we'll tell the story of a very special American flag, one that represents the United States' involvement in World War I, the war that changed the world. You'll hear and see the story of that flag's journey through our program. Today, we'll fly that flag over the National World War I Memorial for the very first time. The new National World War I Memorial in the nation's capital is the last of 4 memorials built here in recognition of the major wars fought in defense of freedom in the 20th century. It also stands proudly as the 100th memorial of the 100 around the country that were restored and renewed over the past several years with the assistance of the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission and its founding sponsor, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. Dan Dayton is the executive director of the World War I Centennial Commission, and he's at the memorial right now.
Welcome to America's National World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C. A very special welcome today to the members of America's Armed Forces who are watching today's broadcast thanks to the support of the defense media activity. From forward deployed operating areas to ships at sea, you represent the best of America. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for your service. The National World War I Memorial is a depiction of what happened 100 years ago when soldiers boarded ships bound for France, determined to bring to a close what they thought would be a war to end all wars. By themselves, they of course couldn't end all war, but their courage and sacrifice did indeed bring a decisive end to a conflict that had killed millions. Today's First Colors ceremony is designed to bring our history home. It's a journey that began with an American flag that first flew over our nation's capital on April 6, 2017, commemorating the centennial of the date that the United States went to war. The colors have since flown over the American World War I battlefield cemeteries of Europe, honoring the doughboys who gave their all during the war, and over the National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City. And now they return home here to their final destination, where they'll take their rightful place, flying high in perpetuity right here above the new National World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C. We're located on America's Main Street, just down Pennsylvania Avenue from the United States Capitol building, at the southeast entrance to the White House, and just 1 block from the Washington Monument. It's in the middle of everything, but the designers have miraculously made this a magnificently serene location. The memorial provides an opportunity to get away from the crowd and contemplate those who served the cause of freedom a century ago. In less than an hour, as our national colors are raised for the very first time over this magnificent memorial, honors to our nation will be rendered by Master Sergeant Matthew Byrne, a member of the United States Army Band, known as Pershing's Own. The Army Band was established by General Pershing himself. This bugle that Master Sergeant Byrne will play belonged to General Pershing. It's been generously donated to the Doughboy Foundation by Sandy Pershing, his granddaughter-in-law, who never lost faith that this day would come at last. History teaches us that we protect our future when we remember our past. following the flag raising, we'll further affirm this with a flyover from the 94th Fighter Squadron of the United States Air Force, based in Langley, Virginia. The 94th has a special resonance today. It's one of the oldest units in today's Air Force, organized during World War I as the 94th Aero Squadron in the U.S. Army Air Service. It was named the Hat in the Ring Squadron by its famed aviators, who included Eddie Rickenbacker and Raoul Lufberry. Now, please join us as we explore the events that inspired its journey to this place on this special day, and meet the people who turned a national vision into a splendid reality. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor to introduce the 46th President of the United States and our Commander-in-Chief, the Honorable Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
My fellow Americans, today we raise the flag over the memorial for the first time. Let's remember all that was sacrificed, all that was sanctified by a proud, brave Americans who served in World War I. In many ways, it was our first modern war, the first use of planes and tanks and new communications and many new dangers. We learned that what it meant to fight trench to trench. We saw the horrors of chemical weapons unleashed. And in some ways, the Great War shifted America's thinking about ourselves and redefined our place in the world. We grappled with what we stood for, what we're willing to fight and die for, to defend, principles of freedom and democracy. We confronted a terrible cost of war in an age of new and deadly technologies. But the commitment and valor of the American women and men who stepped up to serve, whether here at home or on the front lines in Europe, was the same spirit that has always defined American service members. More than 4 million served, 4 million Americans. Millions more supported the war effort at home. And 116,516 lost their lives. The Great War touches almost every American family at the time. For too long, that nationwide service has not been fully commemorated here in the nation's capital. This memorial finally will offer a chance for people to visit and reflect and to remember. More than 100 years has passed since World War I ended, but the legacy and courage of those doughboys sailing off to war and the values they fought to defend still live in our nation today. So thank you. May God bless you and protect our troops.
The World War I Centennial Commission began its journey with a prayer, asking God to bless all those who gave the best of themselves for our country. And so, it's fitting and proper, and my honor, to introduce a man who played a key role in that journey. Representing Missouri's 5th Congressional District, the Honorable Emanuel Cleaver, who will offer today's invocation from the National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City, Missouri.
Please, let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, we approach your holy throne of grace, imploring you, our Creator and our Lord, to hold our military men and women in the blessed palm of your hands. Bless and comfort the military families who, in many ways, are enlisted as well. With much angst, our men and women leave their spouses and children and march and sail and fly to distant lands to serve the interests of this great nation, which for reasons we may not understand on this side of the Jordan, has been richly blessed by you. Thank you. Protect our soldiers as they protect us, Lord Almighty. Embed in these warriors a form of courage which allows them to declare even cognitively that the safety and security of our flagship democracy is more significant than their fears. We pray only to you, Jehovah Nissi, the Lord our banner, that each of our intrepid soldiers may return to these shores safely and whole. Nevertheless, we pray for the war dead and ask you to tuck them eternally into the bosom of Abraham. And now we humbly ask that you touch our leaders and award them the skill to avoid war when it is unnecessary. Please give them lion-heartedness to inspire them to fight fiercely to protect our freedom when there are no other options. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord of peace, we seriously seek peace with our voice, with our heart, and lastly, with our might. And now may the God of peace equip our soldiers and our leaders with everything good for doing his will, and may he work in all of us that which is pleasing to him through our God, to whom be glory and majesty forever and ever. Amen.
They were called doughboys. Then, as now, no one was exactly sure why. Like the name, their heroic deeds fade from memory. It is time to remember. April 1917. The United States enters the Great War. For 2.5 years, France and Great Britain have been deadlocked in an epic struggle with Imperial Germany. Millions are dead, democracy threatened. Can America make the difference? The U.S. military has war plans, but none include shipping millions of men across the Atlantic. Few troops have ever seen combat. The country that invented the airplane has but few, all obsolete. No tanks, no gas masks. Worst of all, the War Department hasn't mandated the study of trench warfare. This education must be paid in blood. Nonetheless, the nation would mobilize and monetize a stunning effort. In just 2 years, the American government would spend almost as much money as it had in its entire history prior to the war. An 8-fold increase in steel shipyards, more than 2 million new industrial workers, and Rosie the Riveter had a mother. Women became a major presence in the workforce, joined the armed services for the first time, and would have the vote a year later. Doughboys would come from every walk of life and all ethnicities. A resolute wave of African Americans, Native Americans, new immigrants, raw-boned farmhands, Ivy Leaguers. Lafayette, we are here. The American Expeditionary Forces, men of the Rainbow Division, the Buffalo, Ivy, and All-American, the Metropolitan, Prairie, and Red Diamond. An English nurse watched them and wrote, "So these were our deliverers at last. So godlike, so magnificent, so splendidly unimpaired, and so timely." Americans entered the front lines in January 1918. A Marine commander, advised to retreat by a French colleague, answered, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here." These were warriors. Frontline troops. 2/3 of the AEF saw action, an amazing percentage. They would fight 13 key battles, with names engraved in the American memory. Cantigny, the Belleau Wood, Soissons, Saint-Ménehould, and the Meuse-Argonne, where 250,000 doughboys led the first assault wave. Vanguard of more than 1 million who engaged in the final epic battles of the Great War. One was a Tennessee farmer named Alvin York, who almost single-handedly killed or captured more than 100 enemy soldiers. Others who saw action included artillery officers named Hubble and Truman. One would later win a Nobel Prize and lend his name to history's most powerful telescope. The other would become president. No one on either side anticipated how quickly the Americans would arrive, engage, and decisively impact the war. The carnage ended on November 11th, 1918. American resolve had stopped the killing. By itself, World War I could not make the world safe for democracy. Liberty must always be defended, strengthened, and cherished. On the fields of France, 116,516 doughboys affirmed this with their lives. It is time to honor their sacrifice and renew our pledge to protect our future by remembering our past.
100 years ago, America rallied to the cause of the Great War. But until today, none of those heroes who fought and died have had a place of recognition among the monuments and memorials here in our nation's capital. To hear why we need a National World War I memorial and to recognize some of those who made today possible, let's meet the visionary behind the memorial, former Vice Chair of the World War I Centennial Commission, Edwin Fountain.
One day in 2008, I stood at the D.C. War Memorial, the memorial on the Mall which honors the residents of the District of Columbia who served in World War I, and I thought, why do we have national memorials to 3 of the 4 great wars of the 20th century, but not to the Great War, the war that brought the United States onto the world stage and began the American century? So I and a handful of others, David DeYoung, Dan Alexander, Rebecca Wilson, Bobby Brewster, together with our champions on Capitol Hill, Congressman Ted Poe and Emanuel Cleaver, and Senators Jay Rockefeller and John Thune, began advocating for a National World War I memorial in the nation's capital. This undertaking brought to bear the energy and commitment of a great many talented people, firms, and agencies. Even the shortest list of those who made this memorial possible is too long, but please indulge me in acknowledging the key principles. First and foremost, Joe Weishar, the 25-year-old, not yet licensed, competition-winning architect from Arkansas, who saw the path to simultaneously preserving and transforming this site, and to meeting the design challenge of locating a war memorial at the center of an urban park. Our partners at the National Park Service, led by Peter May, Associate Director of the National Capital Region. Chairman Rusty Powell, Secretary Tom Lupke, and the members and staff of the Commission of Fine Arts, who patiently challenged us and provided expert guidance at every step of the way. The design team, John Gregg and GWWO Architects, the architect of record. David Rubin and Land Collective, our landscape architects. Grunley Construction, and sculptor Sabin Howard, who is creating the majestic work of art that will come to this space 3 years from now. The list of commissioners, staff, and volunteers of the World War I Centennial Commission who contributed is likewise too long to read. But I must single out Dale Archer, Meredith Carr, and Chris Christopher, and Dr. Libby O'Connell, my fellow commissioner and partner in steering the design process. Finally, 2 indispensable men, Executive Director Dan Dayton, who built the organization and led the fundraising, and Chairman Terry Hamby, who inspired us with his passion and put his shoulder to the wheel at just those couple times when it was needed. I am often asked, why do we need a National World War I memorial? We need it because the war was the most consequential event of the 20th century, and you cannot understand our country or the world we live in without understanding World War I. Because the debates we have today about the roles of women and African Americans and immigrants in our society, about the role of America in the world, about the proper balance between liberty and security, are but echoes of debates we had 100 years ago. Because the idealistic principles of President Woodrow Wilson set the direction of American foreign policy for the next 100 years. Because the war could not have been won without the United States, as American troops stopped the final German offensive at the Marne River, and in the 100 Days campaign that followed, drew the toughest assignment on the Western Front and fought through to victory. Because World War I was the 3rd bloodiest war in our history, and the courage and sacrifice of the doughboys was as heroic and sublime as that of the boys in blue and gray who came before them, and the GIs who came after. Because just as the names Bunker Hill and Yorktown, Shiloh and Gettysburg, Normandy and Iwo Jima ring out in our national memory, so too should Chateau Thierry and Saint Mihiel and the Meuse Argonne. The historian A. Scott Berg said that the stories from the Great War are the stuff of Greek tragedy and are of biblical proportions, and modern America's very identity was forged during this war. This memorial, in word and image, seeks to tell those stories, the soldier's story and the nation's story. I'm often asked, what was the source of your passion for honoring those who served? It wasn't a passion, it was a responsibility. I had a responsibility to James McConnell, my fellow alumnus of the University of Virginia. I had a responsibility to my fellow attorney at law, Major Charles Whittlesey, commander of the Lost Battalion in the Argonne Forest. We have a responsibility to Eben Bradbury and Dorsey Covington and Leonardo Calvani, and 30,000 other soldiers, Marines, and sailors buried in American cemeteries overseas. We have a responsibility to Henry Burton and Jose Archuleta and Jacob Cohen and 4,000 others listed on tablets of the missing. We have a responsibility to 2,000 American servicemen, including one entombed in Arlington, who rest in honored glory, known but to God. I'm often asked, did you do this because you had grandfathers who served? I didn't, though they did, and I am proud that each of them is part of the American story of the war. One of them, a farmer from a place called Back Swamp, North Carolina, had never been farther from home than the next county over until he went to France. The other, a Jewish immigrant from Eastern Europe who came here as a boy in 1906, left university to serve his new country. But this memorial is not for them. This memorial is for Victor Chapman, a volunteer for France who died at Verdun. This memorial is for Albert Schultz, who died in Flanders, and Robert Turner, who died on the Somme, and Whedon Osborne, a Navy medic who died at Belleau Wood and received the Medal of Honor. This memorial is for ship's Captain Charles Satterley, who died at sea, and for 20-year-old Quentin Roosevelt, who died in the air, who died, in the words of his father Theodore, at the crest of life in his golden morning. This memorial is for Red Cross volunteers Dorothy and Gladys Cromwell, sisters who went to war together, and when it was over, on the voyage home, stepped off the railing of the ship together. This memorial is for two American poets who wrote beautifully and tragically of the war that took their lives. Alan Seeger, who had a rendezvous with death at midnight in some flaming town, and to his pledged word was true, and did not fail that rendezvous. And Joyce Kilmer, who lies in a new-made grave today in a wood they call the Rouge Bouquet. Slumber well where the shell screamed and fell. Let your rifles rest on the muddy floor. You will not need them anymore. This memorial is for the man for whom this park is named, General John Pershing, and for the 18-year-old corporal who once shook his hand, Frank Buckles, the last American veteran of the war, who at the age of 108 testified before Congress in support of this memorial. We have a responsibility to Corporal Buckles and the nearly 5 million other Americans, men and women, citizens and immigrants and native peoples, of every race and faith, of every creed and color, who answered their country's call and went in harm's way. It is our duty to remember them. In their names, in their honor, and in their memory, thank all of you for being here today, and thank all of you who made this memorial.
It was 8 years ago that Texas Congressman Ted Poe played a key role in creating the World War I Centennial Commission that would oversee the design and construction of a national World War I memorial. From day one, this has truly been an all-American effort.
Today's First Colors ceremony commemorates those who served in the trenches and on the home front, celebrating a nation forever changed by the sacrifices they made and the ideals they bequeathed. It was a great honor for me, along with my good friend Representative Emanuel Cleaver, to introduce legislation which created the World War I Centennial Commission. It was a wonderfully bipartisan effort that transcended the daily give and take of politics in hopes of achieving a singular important achievement: the long overdue creation of a national World War I memorial. There were so many who joined in the effort. Senators John Thune and Jay Rockefeller were early supporters. Senator Roy Blunt was instrumental, as were his Senate colleagues John Tester, Jerry Moran, John Boozman, Richard Burr, Jack Reed, Lisa Murkowski, and Chris Van Hollen. And also special thanks to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who played a key role in bringing critical funding. In addition to my friend and Representative Cleaver, other colleagues in the House also answered the call. led by Representatives Doug Lamborn, Betty McCollum, and D.C.'s own Eleanor Holmes Norton. To paraphrase a famous saying, soldiers never die until they are forgotten. We cannot forget. It's always remarkable to me when people become aware that family members made a contribution to this war effort a century ago. My great-uncle, George Alfred Weems, served at Camp Travis in Texas and worked with medics there in stamping out the last major pandemic, what was called the Spanish flu. Then Frank Buckles came into my life. Frank advocated for this memorial for years before he passed away in 2011. He was the last World War I veteran in the United States. And I'm here to show Frank that we got it done and that he and his fellow doughboys will never be forgotten.
The commemorative flags flown over America's hallowed grounds have now returned. On their journey back to Washington, they were entrusted to the care of Sandy Pershing, granddaughter of General John J. Pershing, the nation's military leader in World War I. If there's ever been a time when we've forgotten our heroes, Sandy Pershing has always remembered.
When my husband Jack was a little boy, he used to go out with his grandfather, and Jack was always just surprised at the number of people who would follow them down the street with cameras or just pieces of paper asking the general to please sign an autograph. No one remembers. Some of the older people I've met say, General Pershing? That name sounds familiar. Or, oh, there's a Pershing Street in my town. But they have no idea. I'm so happy that we're going to get this bill to recognize all of the people who nobody has paid any attention to. That was just such an altruistic group of people, and everybody went, and they all managed to get along, and they saved each other's lives, and they made it work. The general had every camera in the world on him, and so did some of his aides, like General Patton, MacArthur. These people, many of whom didn't even make it home, have had almost no recognition for what they did. And this war represented all of us in the States. I think the general would say it's about time.
The war did indeed represent all of us. Ambassador Carol Moseley Braun, America's first African-American female senator, honors the memory of her grandfather and the hundreds of thousands just like him.
It is early fall in 1918. Imagine being an American service member crouched down in the shrouded mists of a French valley, deep in the Argonne forests. German gunfire erupts as mortar rounds land nearby. You inch forward toward the enemy with soldiers from France and Belgium on either side of you. The brutal fighting would last nearly 6 weeks until an armistice was reached between Allied forces and Germany on November 11, 1918. More than 350,000 African Americans served during World War I. Through their service, these brave men demonstrated love of country, patriotism, and the importance of equality. The paradox for African Americans fighting on the front lines in France was clear. They defended Americans' freedoms abroad while being denied those very same rights at home. Although the Civil War had ended 50 years before World War I began, racial discrimination was common throughout most of America. Jim Crow laws enforced a culture of segregation. African Americans faced prejudice from their white counterparts in the service and also in civilian communities near stateside military bases. Despite these hardships, African Americans served with honor and earned respect from American troops, Allied service members, and eventually the American public. My grandfather, Thomas Davie, attached to the Army's 10th Cavalry Regiment, famously known as the Buffalo Soldiers, was awarded a U.S. Victory Medal and fought in the battle at Meuse-Argonne. His cousin, who volunteered at the same time, was not so fortunate. His name is memorialized on a statue in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood. Many others gave their lives as well. Corporal Freddie Stowers of South Carolina, attached to the segregated 371st Infantry Regiment, was killed after bravely leading American soldiers against entrenched German forces during a battle in the Ardennes forest. Sergeant Henry Johnson of North Carolina, assigned to the all-black 369th Army Infantry Regiment, engaged in hand-to-hand combat and saved the life of a fellow soldier. Both men were awarded the Medal of Honor more than 70 years after their deaths. The 369th Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters, gained renown for their fierce fighting and dedicated patriotism. The unit never had a member taken as prisoner, nor did it lose a foot of ground it defended, while suffering 1,500 casualties. More than 100 men received awards for valor. The 369th Regiment Band, led by director James Reese Europe, played before thousands of Americans and Europeans. It is credited with introducing Europe to jazz. The World War I Centennial Commission has endorsed the 369th experience, enlisting musicians from historically black colleges and universities around the nation to recreate the Harlem Hellfighters' 369th Regimental Band. Listen.
When the 369th Regimental Army Band returned home, they had become famous throughout Europe. And when peace returned to the battlefields at the end of World War I, so too did a simple red flower, the poppy. Immortalized in John McCrae's famous poem, In Flanders Fields, this little red flower today has become an international symbol of remembrance to honor all who have died in the service of their country. This floral tribute will now also grow here, amidst the stone and metal of this great memorial, blooming every year as we keep faith with those who lie in Flanders Fields.
America's National World War I Memorial has become a reality through the collective efforts of many people and organizations. Foremost among them is the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, founding sponsor of the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. Without the support of Colonel Jennifer Pritzker, its founder and chairwoman, this accomplishment would not have been possible.
World War I was often referred to as the Forgotten War. However, the new National World War I Memorial and this First Colors ceremony draws public attention to these events of 100 years ago. As the descendant of World War I veterans and the founder and chair of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, I am proud that this memorial will ensure we, as a nation, remember their service for 100 years more.
Shortly after the end of World War I, Congress established the American Battle Monuments Commission. General William M. Matz, Jr., 8th Secretary of the ABMC, now charts the path of the commemorative flag we will raise today.
I'm proud to stand here before this statue of General of the Army's John J. Pershing, Commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I and the first chairman of the American Battle Monuments Commission. Commemorating the service and sacrifice of the United States Armed Forces has been the purpose of the Commission since 1923. And we do this at 26 overseas military cemeteries and 30 battle monuments and memorials in 17 countries. More than 233,000 Americans are interred or memorialized at ABMC commemorative sites worldwide, 35,000 of whom gave their all during World War I. And to honor their memory, a commemorative American flag will soon fly over this magnificent memorial. It will fly in perpetuity, and the path it has taken to this place and time represents the epic journey of the doughboys to France and back home again. The commemorative flag first flew at the Capitol, where it signaled our nation's commitment to join the fight. It then traveled overseas, where it was flown over the final resting places of our honored heroes who fell during World War I in the service of freedom. Many of them lie in the very ground on which they fought. The flag then came home, as did nearly 2 million Americans who returned from the bloody battlefields of Europe. It flew over the iconic Liberty Memorial in Kansas City, home of the National World War I Museum. Its journey ends here today at the new National World War I Memorial. I speak for all of us at ABMC to say how proud we are that this great memorial will be added to our sacred sites, to be maintained in the same reverent and meticulous manner as all its sister sites around the world. Let there be no doubt, the flag of our nation, under which I and so many others served, will fly proudly on this site forever.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife.
I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, where the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, oh, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, oh, and I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt of this land. God bless the USA. God bless this country. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless, God, please bless the USA.
Our nation's highest-ranking military officer is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who also serves as principal military advisor to the President, Secretary of Defense, and National Security Council. General Mark Milley, 20th Chairman of the Joint Staff, speaks for all Americans who have worn the uniform.
The National World War I Memorial is a testament to the strength of the American people and honors the bravery and sacrifice our warriors made during the Great War. Thank you to all who made it happen. It is my honor to represent the 2.3 million soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen who are currently serving our country around the world. And I am privileged to be with you today to recognize and salute the courage of all those who served in the First World War. It is our duty to remember what they fought for and why they fought. Thought to be the war to end all wars, those who lived it experienced unimaginable carnage. And by the end of the conflict, it ripped apart 4 empires and killed more than 22 million people. And it set the conditions for World War II, 20 years later, which was the most destructive war in human history. 102 years later, today, we are still feeling the effects of World War I, as it was one of the most significant events to fundamentally shape the modern world. 116,000 American service members made the ultimate sacrifice, and more than 200,000 came back wounded in action. A war of stalemate, trenches, and nutrition. American forces fought with bravery and heroism in famous battles such as Cantigny, Belleau Wood, and Meuse-Argonne. One of those soldiers, Alvin C. York, was a humble man, a hero really, from Tennessee. One of the most decorated soldiers of World War I, he exemplifies the courage, patriotism, and valor of so many service members. The amazing story of Sergeant York is forever immortalized in the annals of American courage under fire. And now, I'm delighted to introduce Sergeant York's grandson, Colonel Gerald York, to tell the rest of the story.
When I was a kid, we would watch the movie, and everybody always wanted to be my grandfather. I'm like, well, no, I need to be my grandfather, you know? My grandfather really didn't want to go to war. If you ever see his draft card, it says, don't want to fight. He ended up getting drafted, and he told him, I've made my peace. I haven't worked out about killing people, but I do want to go support my country. The battle was on October the 8th, 1918, beside a little village called Châtel-Chéry in France. There was heavy machine gun fire, and he saw his friends being killed. Every time the Germans would raise their head to shoot, he would touch them off. There was a German officer he'd captured earlier, said, if you will stop killing my people, I'll make the rest of them surrender. Now at this point, he had already killed 20 or 23 of them. He didn't want to kill anymore. He had 132 prisoners. And so as they marched back through the lines, he asked the German officer, which way would you go? We need to get back to the American lines. And the German officer said, I'd go this way. My grandfather said, okay, we're going this way then. My grandfather, when he came back, was offered about $250,000 in 1919 money to endorse various things. And he said, I did what I had to do to save my comrades. And so, no, the uniform's not for sale. The things he's left me and the things of his that my grandmother gave me after he passed away really means a lot. It keeps me connected to him. He spoke to the 82nd All-American Division as they were reactivated for World War II. He told them, when we fought the war, we thought we had won the peace, but what we found out was we just made a payment on our freedom. And now there's another payment coming due that we're going to have to pay up again. You have to make continual installments on it to keep the peace and keep freedom. He was asked later in life, what do you want to be remembered for? Your actions in France, being awarded the Medal of Honor, meeting the president. And he said, I want my legacy to be that I brought education to rural Tennessee. You know, when I think of my grandfather, I don't think of the soldier. I think of this person who was kind, considerate. He left a great legacy for the family. And I think in some ways left a good example for the country.
When the U.S. went to war a century ago in World War I, we all went to war. Young men of all backgrounds and ethnicities, and women too. A great example of their service was the volunteers who served as telephone operators at the front. Indeed, they made history. It's a little known but fascinating story. When General Pershing saw the critical need for more effective telephone communications, he was told the very best operators were women. So he sent out a call of his own for 200 female telephone operators to serve in the army in France. They needed to be bilingual in English and French and able to perform in a combat environment. These women answered the call and came to be known as the Hello Girls. During the war's centennial period, Kara Reichel and Peter Mills wrote Hello Girls, the musical, the story of those remarkable women and their quest to serve their nation in France on the front lines under our flag. The Hello Girls truly made history then, and we're honored to remember them today.
Each of us helped when the battle was down to the wire. All of the women and men who came through under fire. And maybe not one of us saved the day, but maybe together we all did. When the call got through, when the hill was taken, when the tide was turned and the world was shaken, could it be we all are making history every moment? Could it be we each have a role to play? Could the hardships we go through and the smallest things we do be making history every day?
The Hello Girls connected over 26 million calls during their service. As America's first women soldiers, they paved the way for women's suffrage.
After the war was over, they continued their fight for recognition and equality for almost 60 years.
Until finally, in 1977, the Hello Girls were granted veteran status by the U.S. Congress.
Every choice we make, we're making, shaping and molding once more, because history's affected by how we've intersected, by a million dreams connected, part of one whole. Every person here is making history. Making history. We all have a share in where this goes. With the lines of battle drawn, do you know which side you're on? Will you make history? Will you answer the call? Will you enter the fray? Our part you can play. You're victorious. Are you ready to join in? Come along for it all. If you have the chance, if you have the chance, will you answer the call?
The Hello Girls answered the call and took their place in history as our nation's first women soldiers.
Today, as the Stars and Stripes is raised for the very first time over America's new National World War I Memorial, we are proud to honor their contributions to the cause of freedom.
Their memory will live on.
As the 53rd Secretary of the Interior, David Bernhardt led the department, which includes the National Park Service, throughout the construction phase of the memorial. Today would not have been possible without his leadership and support.
It has been my honor to lead the department during the construction of America's newest national memorial. I want to thank the members of the World War I Centennial Commission, members of Congress, and the nationwide network of donors and supporters for what you have collectively accomplished. Here in our nation's capital, Americans who answered their country's call to serve in Vietnam, Korea, and World War II are memorialized. And now, at long last, we've also kept the faith with those who served in World War I. The stories shared today illuminate the legacy of their achievements and their sacrifice, a heritage vital to our national memory and identity.
As the 54th Secretary of the Interior, it is my honor to lead your Department of the Interior in our charge to conserve and manage our nation's natural resources and cultural heritage for the benefit and enjoyment of the American people. As the proud daughter and granddaughter of Navy and Marine Corps veterans, I'm honored that one of my first acts since assuming this office is to establish this National World War I Memorial. My grandfather, Conrad Holland, served as a gunnery sergeant during World War I, and my great-uncle, Private Oscar Holland, served in the 168th Infantry, seeing combat in some of the hardest-fought battles American soldiers faced during the war, including the Champagne-Marne Offensive, whose name appears on this memorial. My mother is a Navy veteran who also served as a civil servant at the Bureau of Indian Affairs for 25 years as she raised 4 kids as a Marine Corps wife. My father, J.D. Dutch Holland, was a 30-year career Marine who earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action during his 2-year tour in Vietnam. Just last week, my sisters and I visited his gravesite across the Potomac in Arlington National Cemetery. As the daughter of a combat veteran, it's not lost on me that the veterans of World War I never lived to see a national memorial to their service and sacrifice here in our nation's capital, a place where their families could share their stories and heal their grief. Today, we right that wrong. Today, we remember them. On behalf of President Biden and the Congress of the United States, and on behalf of a grateful nation, it is my honor to officially authorize that our American flag be flown over the World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C., beginning today, Friday, April 16th, 2021. That flag shall be flown every day in honor and in memory of all who served our nation during the Great War. I assure you, as caretakers of this memorial, the National Park Service will be here every day of every year, watching over this memorial to keep it and protect it, and to pass along the stories of the heroism told here for future generations of Americans. Their deeds will forever be enshrined in this memorial because of the great work done by the architect Joe Weishar and the design team, who, in close consultation with the Commission of Fine Arts and so many others, created this sacred space. It is truly a remarkable accomplishment and a fascinating story. Thank you.
The thing that matters most to me about this project is that the people who come and visit will walk away knowing something more about World War I. What we want to do is really start telling the stories of the men and women who served. Throughout the memorial and throughout the additional content being provided through the app and the website, people will be able to access these stories in ways that they've never been able to before. When you come to the memorial, there are so many different parts and pieces to look at and engage with. There are the quotes that tell the stories taken directly from the writings of the people who were in the war. There are the sounds of the cascade fountains that drown out the noise of the city and create a place of quiet contemplation. The sculpture itself is really the focus. And there's no way to come to the memorial and not just stand in awe of that sculpture. What Sabin Howard has brought to the project is just an amazing sense and understanding of composition and storytelling. And he can take an image or a set of images and through the actions of each of the figures, give you something that has movement to it and volume. Rather than just having one storyline that sort of wove its way through, you get sort of macro and micro scales of how the country was changing during the war, how the war changed individuals, and how the world changed. We wanted to create a memorial that really had a one-to-one connection between the visitor and the memorial itself. So when you stand in front of the figures in Sabin's sculpture, they don't loom over you in this grandiose way. This memorial will really be a memorial of the 21st century. It has technological components that have never really been done either at this scale or being applied to a memorial. The augmented reality, the virtual reality, those kinds of things just didn't even exist when we started this project. The app works both as a standalone app that you can use from your living room, or you can use it in the park itself and will pop up different bits of information and the different pieces of augmented reality as you need or want them. I'm proudest of the fact that the people who worked on this project were committed from day one. Every person I met in this journey all got very passionate about the things that they wanted to see the design speak to, and having such an excellent team and sounding board of people who you could bounce ideas off of has just been an absolute pleasure for me. This process has made me do that deep dive and learn more about World War I and really connect with it. If people come to this memorial and they walk away saying, I know something more, then I think mission accomplished.
This is America's memorial. It belongs to every one of us, and it began with a truly bipartisan effort that built a foundation for success. Senator Mitch McConnell was instrumental in helping to transform a seemingly distant vision into a vital reality.
Hello, I'm Senator Mitch McConnell. Back in 1914, a reporter from my state of Kentucky named Irvin Cobb became one of the first American journalists to witness the Great War. Writing for the Saturday Evening Post, he said, quote, I saw enough to cure any man of the delusion that war is a beautiful, glorious, and inspiring thing, and to make him know it for what it is, altogether hideous and utterly awful. Before the armistice, 41,000 of his fellow Kentuckians and more than 2 million Americans came face to face with the horrors of war over there. There are already countless monuments to American service members in town squares and village greens all across our country. And an ocean away, we have American monuments and cemeteries in France and Belgium, where ordinary fields became hell on earth. But today, we're returning our heroes to the forefront of our national memory and to the center of our nation's capital. We wouldn't be here without the work of the Centennial Commission. 3 years ago, I was asked to nominate a member of that commission. I called an extraordinary Kentuckian named Terry Hamby. I knew his professionalism, his persistence, his own military service, and his lifelong commitment to his fellow veterans would make Terry a crucial asset to this effort. And the commission agreed. They elected him chairman. And thanks to his leadership and all of the hard work, we get to unveil this fitting tribute to all the men and women who did their bit during this terrible conflict. So to everyone whose talents and efforts have made today possible, thank you. As you raise the flag over our newest memorial, you're honoring the memory of a generation and the making our nation proud as well.
Thank you, Mr. Leader, for your inspiration and guidance supporting our team to completion of this memorial. Thank you for doing, as they said 100 years ago, your bit to remember our doughboys. I want to thank the 53rd Secretary of the Interior, David Bernhardt, for all of his unwavering support during construction, and the 54th Secretary of the Interior, Secretary Holland, for the continued support as the World War I Memorial becomes a part of the National Park Service. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our founding sponsor, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. Without the foresight of Colonel Jennifer Pritzker, who stepped up to lead early on, none of this would have come to pass. Many others came forward too. The Star Foundation and the Lilly Foundation are major donors who responded so generously. And there were many other American companies with major gifts of over $1 million that saw the significance of honoring our doughboys. Thank you all, and thank you to those Americans who gave to our Armistice campaign, $11.11, symbolic of the date of the armistice, and any amount given by any American. All gifts are important because this is America's memorial, and you each can take great pride that you have built it. The doughboys we honor today were the best of their generation. Their average age was 24. To borrow a biblical reference, they really did quench the power of fire and became mighty in war. I truly believe the doughboys are a great cloud of witnesses to what we're doing here today. They came from all across our great nation to serve in a place most had never visited, to fight in a war that didn't start, in order to ensure peace and liberty for people they never met. They did it because it was what the country asked of them. They did their bit. These were our doughboys. Poet John McRae likened their efforts to a torch which was being passed when he wrote in Flanders Field, "To you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be it yours to bear it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field." This flag can be in so many ways likened to McRae's torch. It's been, after all, the torch of our nation since 1777. Legend has it that Betsy Ross's famous flag was first flown in battle during the Revolutionary War at the Battle of Cooch's Bridge near Philadelphia. This flag inspired our national anthem in Baltimore Harbor in 1812. It was flown in Texas in 1846. and it flew at Antietam in the Spanish-American War in 1898. It refused to retreat at Belleau Wood, and it was held high at Normandy and in Iwo Jima. And it was there in Incheon and at Quezon and at Medina Ridge. And it inspired resolve in all of us on 9/11. This flag, this torch, was flown too over places some of us may have forgotten. At the Battle of the Meuse-Argonne in France in World War I, which was the largest battle in United States military history, involving more than 1.2 million doughboys. This symbol of our nation, this torch, will now fly to honor those who no longer have a voice, who will be remembered in this place. So now, as the chairman of the United States World War I Centennial Commission, before you and this great cloud of witnesses, I direct you to raise this torch as we bear it high, this symbol of our great nation, at this sacred place. And let us run with endurance to ensure the doughboys are never forgotten.
Whether our lives and our deaths were for peace and a new hope,
or for nothing, we cannot say. It is you who must say this.
They say we leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning.
We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us.
I will remember you. I will remember the Doughboys. We will never forget those who fought.
The Doughboys will forever be an enduring icon in American history.
We, Legionnaires, will remember our founding generation and continue their legacy of more than a century of strengthening America.
You live in our hearts. America will always remember.
Your sacrifices will never be forgotten.
I will remember them.
I will remember them.
I will always remember our Doughboys.
You live in our hearts. America will always remember.
Remember them.
I will remember them.
You live in our hearts. America will always remember.
We will never forget the Doughboys.
America will always remember.
Your sacrifices will never be forgotten.
Remember them.
I will remember them.
The 108th Infantry Regiment and the 27th Brigade Combat Team remember the Doughboys.
We remember them!
Your sacrifice will never be forgotten.
We will never forget them.
We will never forget.
I remember. We will never forget the Doughboys.
On behalf of all those who made this memorial a reality, thank you for being with us today. Through your presence, you have paid tribute to every American who served and sacrificed in World War I. From this day forward, through stewardship programs and activities, the Doughboy Foundation will continue its mission to keep faith with the American Doughboy. As we honor them, let us renew our pledge to protect our future by remembering our past.